I think we'll do all of Proverbs today. We're not going to obviously read all of them or discuss all of them. In fact, we're not going to read and discuss probably many of them. That's interesting. But we'll discuss their kind of background, their organization a little bit, and discuss the stuff that's up on the board. And then I want to kind of look at them or consider them as a model for this passage in Shakespeare's Hamlet, which in Shakespeare studies, at least, that I'm aware of, you don't see a lot of. That is, you don't see a lot of scholars looking at this passage in Hamlet necessarily as having any relation to the book of Proverbs. Usually the way it's discussed, these lines from Polonius to his son Laertes, is that this is bad advice. Okay, and we'll discuss that. So your introduction begins, and I've got a couple of different additional texts up here that I'm going to kind of go back and forth to. Your introduction discusses Proverbs being divided into several sections, just as we discussed. Psalms is divided into several sections. And the greatest number of them, let's say, they are attributed to whom? Solomon. Okay? Why? What's Solomon supposedly known for?
He's the wisest man that ever lived.
Why?
Because God granted it to him when he asked.
God said, because you found favor in my sight, I'm essentially the genie. I'll give you your 3 wishes to some extent. Okay? So, what does Solomon ask for? Or let me rephrase that. What does Solomon not ask for? God specifically says at least 2 things. He doesn't ask for long life, and he doesn't ask for money. Ooh. There's another Harry Potter connection right there. He doesn't ask for money, and he doesn't ask for long life. What's he ask for? Wisdom. Right? And then we get the account. I don't remember which Chronicles it's in, Chronicles or Kings. We get the account, these 2 women come to him, and they have a problem. Both women are prostitutes. Both women have essentially a newborn baby, or had a newborn baby. And one of the women, sleeping with the baby at night, rolls over on top of the baby and kills the baby. The other woman takes her dead baby, puts it with the other woman, takes her live baby, and in the morning, the woman with the dead baby wakes up and says, "This isn't my kid." And the other woman says, "Yes, it is." So they go to Solomon. And how does Solomon resolve that claim? He says, "Give me chaff. Bring me a sword. I'll divide the baby in 2, and I'll give half to you and half to you." And the woman whose baby is dead says, "Sounds equitable." And the woman whose baby is alive, that baby, says, No, give it to her. Solomon says, "There's the mother." Why? Because a mother would be more willing to give her baby away than to have it end up dead. Okay? And from that point on, he kind of develops this reputation. The Queen of Sheba, Ethiopia, comes up, visits him, and says, "You're even wiser than I've heard," etc., etc. Okay? So we get all of these proverbs, not all of them. We get quite a few of these proverbs attributed to Solomon. And I don't think, this introduction doesn't talk about it. Which book am I thinking of does? Might be this one. I don't think it's in the Oxford Companion. Says one of the reasons for that is when you have a kind of a book of wisdom, a book where instruction is given, you want to assign authority to it. You want to assign kind of an authorial nature to it, to someone who is important. in one's kind of national background, one's history. Okay? For example, in the 19th century, especially the latter half, school books, little readers for children to learn how to read by, often had sayings of the founding fathers. What did George Washington apparently, anecdotally, say? I cannot tell a lie. Why? Because he is accused of chopping down the cherry tree, and he had to admit, yes, I did, I cannot tell a lie, etc. Okay? Same kind of thing. So why not use David, who was the quote-unquote greatest king in Israel's history? What was that? Oh, it must be a pencil sharpener on the other wall. Never heard that before. I've been teaching here 27 years. Why not assign it to David? Well, what's the previous book? Psalms. The majority of the Psalms there are assigned to David. Okay? So that's probably why it's not assigned to David. David, is responsible for kind of the liturgy that's used in the temple. He's responsible for songs that are used in the temple. So the Proverbs get assigned to his son. Now, is it in this introduction? Yeah, some of it is. It's alluded to. It's thought that the Proverbs that are included in here have a pretty wide range in terms of their dates of origin, let's say, or composition. Your introduction does mention in its last paragraph that towards the end in chapter 24, I think it's chapter 24, it's book 3, essentially, mentions, these instructions, and that these instructions might be modeled on the Egyptian book of wisdom, the instruction of Amenemop, okay, which has 30 kind of proverbial sayings, okay? Well, your text mentions, these 30 sayings, essentially. Well, that goes back to about 1000 BC, okay? Solomon lived 9th century, 8th, 9th century. David was 9th, 10th century, somewhere in that period. So some of the Proverbs, it's not, go back roughly 500 years to before the book is written. Okay? Because the book is written, let me rephrase this. Some of the Proverbs, we're pretty sure, are written during the exilic and the post-exilic period. Exilic period when Israel is carried off to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. And they're over there for 70 years, something like that. Okay? And then they start to come back afterwards. Some of the work on the book of Proverbs probably goes up even closer to our time, 3rd, 4th century BC. Right? And what is going on there, according to this writer, a guy named Paul Tarazi, what this writer suggests is that what the author, compiler, what the compiler of Proverbs, the person who puts it in the form that we have it today, is doing is he's gathering these sayings to prepare this kind of book of wisdom that we call it. For what purpose? Well, this right here. To know wisdom and instruction. What kind of wisdom? What's wisdom? The beginning, it's the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Okay? Why? Well, what happens when Israel gets carried off into Babylon? They kind of forget their history. They lose touch with Jerusalem, the city of Zion, the holy hill, the holy mountain, all that kind of stuff. And so what the compiler is doing is he's essentially bringing together what? And that's why I've got this written over here. It's a reminder. It's a reminder to, specifically, the book addresses whom? Is the book addressing Israel, the people of God? No. It's addressing whom? My son. Okay? So it might be literal that the compiler is addressing his son. Probably, however, the my son is kind of, in the, in the idiosyncratic use of that. Of an older man speaking to a younger man and just saying, son, dude, doesn't mean literal blood relation. Probably here, master, teacher to pupil, student. Okay? And what's the purpose? To teach about partially the history of Israel, but more importantly, what the history of Israel teaches. And that again goes back to Deuteronomy, okay, which I'll point out a couple of links between Proverbs, Psalms, Proverbs, Deuteronomy, okay, to show what is going on here. Because all the way up through Proverbs, if we were able to do all the prophets, what I would suggest is from Genesis to the end of the Old Testament, you have one major theme. Anyone want to take a guess as to what it is? Some of it's on the board. It starts with Adam in the garden. It's traced through Noah, and then through Abraham and his two sons, his son and grandson, and then through Jacob's sons, okay, and then through the rest of the books of the Pentateuch, and then Joshua, then Judges, etc., etc. It's this. But it's, what is that ending on that verb? It's present participle. It means doing the action now. It's walking in the ways and paths of what? The Lord God. So how do you walk in his ways and paths? By fearing him and doing his commandments. That's knowing wisdom and taking instruction. Okay? I would argue that's the overarching theme. All the way from Genesis 1:1, you could say, to the end of Malachi. Okay? And that then gets picked up in the New Testament. Because someone in the New Testament says what about himself? I am the way. That is, I'm the road. Walk on me. Follow my direction, etc., etc. Okay? So, go back to the introduction. I don't have it divided up here, but I'm just going to kind of reread what's in here. And what's in here, in your introduction in the New Oxford, whatever it is, the Oxford Annotated Bible, and the Oxford Companion to the Bible matches identically, okay, in terms of some of what they say about the division of the book. This guy's Old Testament introduction on the books of Psalms and Wisdom modifies it slightly differently. Okay, I'm just going to stick with these two. So, second paragraph. It's a small library of teaching materials of different origins and dates. Okay, so we've talked about that a little bit. It's got four main parts. The first part, 1:1 through 9:18. So 1:1 through 9:18. So 1:1, Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, through, turn to 9:18. Why through 9:18? Because look how 10 begins. The Proverbs of Solomon. That is, we get a new introduction, if you want, or a new ascription. So it's kind of like, well, these first 1 through 9:18, that's one collection by Solomon. The second, okay, which is 10:1 through 22:16. Okay, is a second set. 22:16 is a second set. Okay, why is that a second set? Because notice there's nothing really between 22:16 and 22:17 that indicates 22:17. I keep losing my place. That indicates 22:17 is ascribed to somebody else, is a different collection. So what's different about it? Okay, one thing in your text, visually just looking at it, what's different? There's a gap between 22:16 and 22:17. That gap is indicating visually to the reader something changes between those two. Well, go back to, let's see here. Go back to the beginning of 10. And what do we see? Everything beginning in chapter 10 is one of those two-line proverbs. All right? Something, 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 but something, 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 for something, 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 because. That kind of thing. Okay? He who oppresses the poor to increase his own wealth, this is 22:16, or gives to the rich, will only come to want. So you get kind of a, if you do this, then this happens. Okay? 22:17. The formula changes. Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply your mind to my knowledge. What is being re-emphasized right there that we've not heard since the beginning of chapter 10? Pay attention. Get wisdom and instruction. Okay? So, incline your ear, pay attention. Why? I'm going to give you wisdom, the words of the wise, and apply your mind to knowledge. For it will be pleasant if you keep them all within you, if all of them are ready on your lips. What is the them in both those second two lines? Verse 18, wisdom and knowledge. But it's not the same kind of form that you see, for example, 22:1. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold. Okay? So, 22:16. The next one picks up 22:17. 22:17. And this is a short one. To 24:22. So 22:17 we just talked about. We'll go through 24. 22. For disaster from them will rise suddenly, and who knows the ruin that will come from them both. We get that visual break again, and then we have this single line thrown in. These also are sayings of the wise, indicating, oh, look, I found more. That's almost literally what it implies, that the compiler has brought together so far these three sections, and then somebody hands him another couple pages of Proverbs. Well, I'll just slide them in right here. Okay? So 22:17 through 24:22, and the last one, for 25:1 through 27. All right? So, through 24:22. So 24:24 through 34 are included in what your editors in their introduction call essentially an appendix. It's like a little sub-collection, Okay? So 25:1, let's go through 29:17. But 29:17 isn't the end of the book. There's still 30 and 31. 29:17. Discipline your son, and he will give you rest. He will give delight to your heart. 29:18, however. 29:27. Didn't think that was right. An unjust man is an abomination to the righteous, but he whose way is straight is an abomination to the wicked. Chapter 30, new ascription. These are not by Solomon, and they're not by anonymous. These are actually words attributed to the words of, I have no idea how you pronounce the name, Agur, son of Jacob of Massa, or the oracle. Agur, son of Jacob, the oracle. Okay? You got a footnote about, that you get a footnote about each of the sections. So go back to the introduction for a minute. Okay? So each of its four main parts, what we were just discussing, is a separate work with its own title. Not quite, right? Because between these two, there's not a separate title. There's just a break. Title of the first is expanded, etc., etc. So, book 1, we're told, contains 10 extended discourses of admonition and warning, and 2 poems. A poetic allegory contrasting wisdom and folly, in shorter admonitions and poems. This material seems to come from a teacher of the 4th or 3rd century BC. That is, this stuff, that teacher of the 4th or 3rd century, that's kind of the final, what is called, we would call that individual redactor. The final person who takes the material and puts it all together. Okay? Book 2 and Book 4, separately called Proverbs of Solomon, which is used by the editor, the redactor, at the very beginning in 1:1. It's almost like he gathered all this material. He's got these 2 separate collections, 2 separate bundles, if you want. Okay? And they have on them Solomon's Proverbs. So he gets those. He gets the first book, and he kind of just lumps them all together. All right? Book 3, exhortations resembling the instructions of Egyptian sages, etc., etc. And we're not going to say much about 4. So let's look at the opening of Proverbs. Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Now, what does that imply about everything that follows? Not just this first book, and not even the first 2 books. It implies everything that comes after. Okay, are the Proverbs of Solomon. Look at the first one. Okay, that men may know wisdom and instruction, understand words of insight, receive instruction in wise dealing, righteousness, justice, and equity, that prudence may be given to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. The wise man also may hear and increase in learning, and the man of understanding acquire skill, to understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. Notice, that's one sentence. Okay. A sentence, literally, if you go back to the Latin meaning of the word sentence, sententiae, okay, that's what it comes from, is a statement of wisdom. What a sentence is. Okay? That's one long sentence. That one long sentence essentially lays out everything that's going to follow. Well, let's back up for a moment. Back up to something that your introduction doesn't think about. And I didn't really think about it either until I pulled out this book that I have and started, reading some background stuff from class. And it kind of smacked me between the eyes like a 2x4. Because I never really thought about it. Let me rephrase that. I hadn't really thought about it in this sense. Running out of space. What is wisdom? How do you define wisdom? I mean, the books we're doing right now that will be for the next test, which you won't take until you get your previous test back, so don't worry about that. If you were. Include what? Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Now, I could include a lot more because your book has the wisdom of Sirach, the sayings of Solomon, the Song of Solomon. Those are all included as wisdom books of the Old Testament. Okay? Psalms often isn't. That is, it's not counted as one of the wisdom books. But I'm including it because it's one of the poetic books. And all those other books, they're all poetry, essentially. Okay? So what's wisdom? Don't just, fear the Lord. What's wisdom generally? We talk about various kinds of wisdom. Chinese wisdom, Buddhist wisdom, Hindu wisdom sayings, Muslim wisdom sayings, Christian wisdom. What's meant by all of those? Especially the second part of it. Is Hindu wisdom different than Christian wisdom? It is, but only in one sense. Its origin. What's universal about all those is this. And what I mean by that is this idea of wisdom it means if it's truly wisdom, it applies universally. That it applies to all people, all places, all times. If it's real wisdom, then everybody if they hear it, they kind of go, yeah, it's right. Okay? The way this guy Tarazi puts it, he says, he's in a section just on wisdom literature, etc. He says, this incontrovertibility of wisdom can be understood only if one realizes that wisdom is basically universal. A given saying cannot be wisdom here and folly there. That is, it can't be wisdom in one place or one culture, and foolishness in another. Notice, wisdom is not law, right? Because laws vary. Law varies from culture to culture. If it could, it would be concomitantly wisdom and folly, which is impossible according to the definitions of the words. Okay? Solomon was not wise in Israel and potentially a fool somewhere else. That's why when the Queen of Sheba meets him, she goes, this is real wisdom. She realizes even in her own country what Solomon says would be wise. Okay? And you get the description in 1 Kings 4:29-34, which we didn't read. And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, largeness of mind like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all people of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt, for he was wiser than all other men, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, no idea who that is, and Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahal. His fame was in all the nations round about. He also uttered 3,000 proverbs. Got the book of Proverbs, 30 chapters. More than, probably 100 in each one. His songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and birds, reptiles. Men came from all peoples to hear the wisdom of Solomon and from all the kings of the earth. So, Kings tells us, 2 Kings tells it, 1 Kings tells us, Solomon uttered all of these proverbs. And this guy in the 3rd, 4th century gathers together these proverbs and says, well, since 1 Kings tells us Solomon uttered, I'm going to attribute them to him. Okay? So, go on about wisdom and folly. The striking feature of wisdom is that it is a reality in and of itself and thus cannot be qualified. That is, wisdom just is. One does not speak of right versus wrong wisdom. Right? If you're talking about wisdom, is wisdom ever bad? No. Wisdom is always morally good. It's always morally upright. We can talk about laws. Laws can be morally bad, right? Supreme Court, what year? 1850? The Dred Scott division. Little Freudian slip there, not really a slip. Decision. What did the Dred Scott decision say? Blacks don't count fully as people. 2/3, I believe it was. And it took what? An awful long time to reverse that decision. Okay? That was a foolish law. Or it wasn't actually a law, it was a Supreme Court decision, which has the effect of law, because laws are passed by the legislature, not by Supreme Courts and such. Okay? But that was a foolish, stupid statement. No one would say that passes for wisdom. Okay? So wisdom is always morally upright. Okay? Rather, Tarazi goes on, one rather speaks of wisdom versus lack thereof. We talk about people doing wise things or people doing foolish things. The president the other day, I would say, in an utter fit of foolishness, he would disagree, said, in my infinite wisdom, he pulled American troops out of northern Syria. Even though the president of Turkey said, we're going to move in, don't do that, it's a bad idea. They moved in, and the next day, Trump said, bad idea. Well, he knew what was going to happen. Okay? So, wisdom is wisdom, or it is nothing at all. It either is wisdom, or it's the opposite. Okay? Sounds kind of like it shouldn't even need to be said, right? Where there is wisdom, there is no folly, and vice versa. Where there is folly, wisdom is not to be found. A wise man is not foolish, and a fool is unwise, which is why so many of the Proverbs say what? About speaking wisdom to a fool. Don't. Why?
They may drag you down with them.
They might drag you down with them, or a fool will never listen to wisdom. A fool cannot understand wisdom. Okay? What's meant here by a fool? A fool says in his heart, there is no God. Proverbs and Psalms both say. So, if this is so, that a wise man is not foolish and a foolish man is not wise, if this is so, then the knowledge, intelligence, and understanding that go hand in hand with wisdom are ipso facto, that is, by their very being, right and correct. They cannot be shown in any way to be wrong or incorrect. What is a saying of wisdom in one of our United States founding documents?
All men are created equal.
Prove it. You can't, right? You can't. You can't on the basis of IQ. You can't on the basis of ability. You can't on the basis of social status. You can't on the basis of economic status. So the equal there is referring to what? Inherent, innate worth as a human being. Pure and simple. Okay? What else? These rights come from God. Jefferson wrote. Prove it. You can't. Okay? It's a wisdom thing. Jefferson is assuming, another phrase for that is, it is axiomatic. O-matic. You're all familiar with that, right? What's O-matic mean? Like automatic. It just goes without saying. It's going to happen. It automatically, or I use the word, happens. Okay? It's axiomatic. It's a given. We're going to start from this point. Okay? Another word I would use, or I used at the beginning of the semester for that, is it's a presupposition. It's something you suppose to be true from the very beginning. Okay? So, the reason it's right correct is that a wise utterance or statement is done at the culmination of a long period of time during which its correctness has already been proven through a lengthy series of tests. If at any point in time an utterance or statement will have been proven wrong, then it is folly, not wisdom. That is, wisdom has to be what? All the time. Everywhere. True. It has to be right. Okay? It's an outcome that's already been tested and shown to be right. So what does this prove, or what does this suggest about age and wisdom? Wisdom usually comes, I shouldn't say that. Wisdom should come with age. That is, the older one grows, the wiser one should grow. Because what produces wisdom? How did he put it? It's the culmination of a long time during which its correctness has already been proven through a lengthy series of tests. That is, one has lived one's life and one has learned from experience certain wisdoms, certain truths. Here's a truth. Will this door ever be soft enough that I can just walk right through it? No. I could do that every day, 10 times a day for 10 years. Well, what would happen every time? Bang. Okay? Hopefully what would happen after not 5 years, but maybe 5 times attempting that? I would gain a little wisdom. That wisdom would be, I'm a solid, that's a solid. It can't be done. That is a wisdom. Notice, wisdom isn't necessarily some high philosophical idea like beauty, truth, justice, etc. Okay? What's another wisdom? There are several. Polonius, let me point one out real quickly. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and friend. Why is that a statement of wisdom? What happens if you give your friend a loan and your friend doesn't pay you back? What have you just lost? Probably 2 things. Money and friend. So the upshot, the wisdom of that is, if you don't lend money to your friends, 1, you'll retain your money, and 2, you'll retain your friend. What's another way of looking at that? Don't make it a loan. Make it a gift. Because there's all kinds of proverbs in here about giving to the poor. Okay? Anything else there? Wisdom is either accepted or refused. Whoever refuses it does nothing else except reveal his true identity as a fool. Hence the extreme statement from Proverbs 27:22. Crush a fool in a mortar with a pestle. You know what a mortar and pestle look like? Hollow. You take something that's long and hard at the end and you grind it. Okay? Along with crushed grain, yet his folly will not depart from him. That is, like me walking into the door, the fool will do what? He'll keep trying. He will keep trying. What's one of the modern, I don't remember who supposedly said this, Einstein or somebody. What's one of the supposedly modern definitions of insanity?
Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result.
Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Okay? Just look at Congress. Look at half the laws they passed regarding, Social Security, taxes, etc. I'm a native of California. If you know anything about California today, it's totally upside down. Their gas taxes, for example, here's an example of that. Their gas taxes are hugely expensive. They're paying currently today nearly $4 a gallon for gas. We pay, $2.39, $2.35. Theirs are nearly $4 a gallon because of the gas taxes. The gas taxes aren't going to what the gas taxes are supposed to go to. Roads. What do they use it for? Stupid magnetic levitation trains to nowhere and all this other kind of stuff. PG&E, one of the public utilities, has raised rates over the last several decades, but they didn't turn the money that they raised rates for back into the infrastructure. What's an infrastructure of a power company? Anybody? Power lines. So, yesterday, 800,000 customers in California had their power turned off. That included hospitals, nursing homes, rehabilitation facilities, jails, supermarkets, all the places that were in the areas that had, which was pretty much all of Northern California, right, had 800,000 customers, 3 million people, estimated, had their power turned off. Why? Well, they're having high winds. It's that time of year. Guess what? It happens every year. It's not climate change. This is California. It's happened every year as far back as you can check by looking at tree rings. Right? High winds coming from the east, blowing offshore. All the tinder and everything is already dry, and they're worried a tree will brush up against the power line and spark and cause another fire like the two major fires of last year, the Camp Fire and the Carr Fire. Camp Fire destroyed little town of Paradise, 27,000 people. The entire town burned down. I had a couple of friends who lived there. Right? So they haven't fixed the power lines that are decades old, that have the insulation rubbed off. So a tree rubs up against it. That's how one of the fires started last year. Right? It's foolishness to do what? To keep raising taxes, to keep raising rates, and to not use the money to take care of it. Okay? Go back to the beginning of Proverbs. I don't think nothing else in that spot. Yeah. Let me talk about this real quick. Now, let me talk about this. Purpose of the Proverbs, that is, the book of Proverbs, right, is to teach the young, my son, or someone else, to think realistically about life. Human condition. The human condition. Okay? What's the human condition?
It's how we're put together.
How we're put together. What else is it? Bill's right. It's what we face from beginning to end of our lives. Okay? This, by the way, this is one of the values of reading. It teaches us about the human condition. It takes us out of my own place and time. It takes me out of myself. Okay? And can introduce me to the experiences of someone else, another place, another time, another sex, another race, etc. And can put me in that individual's shoes, which does then what to me? It broadens my experience. How? I don't literally experience that person's life. I do it how? I do it imaginatively. So when somebody says, oh, well, you can't understand. You're not a fill in the blank. Not true. Not true. I can understand for a couple of reasons. One, we're both human. Do we have the exact same experiences? No. Can I share in that experience a little bit? Yes, I can. How? By reading of that experience a little bit. By embodying through that, imaginative experience. Okay? So to think realistically about life. Okay. How? To face the human condition. So let's go back to this. To think realistically. J.R.R. Tolkien, in his essay, on fairy stories, says, talking about fantasy literature. I mean, the essay is really about fairy stories, but by that he means fantasy literature. Okay? He says, creative fantasy, this is an exact quote, creative fantasy is founded upon the hard recognition that things are so in the world as it appears under the sun, upon a recognition of fact, but not a slavery to it. Creative fantasy is founded upon the hard recognition that things are so in the world as it appears under the sun upon a recognition of fact, but not slavery to it. Okay? Realistically. To think realistically about life says what about life? Because a lot of us want to think unrealistically about it. Or a lot of people do think unrealistically about it. We have, I should not go there. I could get in so much trouble. But what that? We have an attitude today, maybe not we personally in this room, okay? There is this idea in our society that life ought to be fair. Is that realistic? No. No. And guess what? It never will be fair. No child is born and handed a certificate upon birth that says, your life will be fair. If anything, that child was handed a certificate that says what? Life will be hard. Suck it up. Deal with it. Here's your hand. Do the best you can. Okay? Overcome hardship, etc. That's facing life realistically. That's what Tolkien means over here, that creative fantasy is founded upon the hard recognition that things are so in the world as it appears under the sun. What's the hard recognition? It's hard to accept that life is hard, that life is unfair, that certain people do have advantages, certain people do have privileges, certain people are poor, certain people... Daughter has a friend in nursing school. They're both in their 20s. That friend had a child die, 5 years old. Totally unexpected. That sucks. Okay? But that's part of the recognition that things are so in the world as it appears under the sun. That happens. Period. You have to accept that happens. You cannot walk around and say, but it shouldn't, because it does. But Tolkien says it's a recognition of that fact, but not slavery to it. Why is the not slavery to it important? What does slavery imply? You can't change it, right? You recognize the fact, but you're not enslaved to it. Why? Because what can we attempt to do? Not merely wish it were better. Hunger is a problem, right? It's a problem not just outside the United States, it's a problem in the United States. What can a single individual do to help solve the problem of hunger? Give to some food bank? Yeah, okay. Make it more personal. How about giving $5 to the guy standing with the cardboard sign? How about buying a meal and giving it to the guy standing, holding a cardboard sign? What have you done? You solved world hunger? Nope. You solved world hunger for that individual for the next few hours. Okay? That's not being enslaved to the recognition that hunger exists. Okay? That's the human condition. What's the human condition? The recognition of these things. Okay? According to the Oxford Companion, ignorance and poverty. Does ignorance exist? Hell yes. What is the number one cause? I would argue at least, maybe I'm totally wrong. What is the number one cause of racism? It's ignorance. Literally, what does the word ignorant know? That word is not bad. It's not a pejorative. It's not, some kind of racial thing. It just means literally not knowing. Not knowing. You go a quarter of an inch into quantum physics, and I'm as ignorant as this eraser. I read science articles. Why? Because it's totally cool. But it gets too sciencey and whoop, I'm gone. I'm really out of there. Math, you don't even have to go a quarter inch. A millimeter, maybe. Or a micron, maybe, okay? Ignorance in and of itself is not bad. But when you base your actions upon ignorance, that's stupidity. That's racism. That's prejudice. It's all based on ignorance. Why? Because most of the people who are prejudiced or racist, etc., act out of not knowing. Are there some malevolent? Sure. There are definitely an awful lot of malevolent, prejudiced people. Okay? Poverty. No, notice for some reason, I'm not sure why, it doesn't explain it, in the Oxford Companion, it links these two. But I've known a lot of poor people who are not ignorant. They might be ignorant in the sense of maybe not having a university education, but really, who gives a flying rip? I don't care if anybody has a college degree or not. Doesn't matter. And frankly, a college degree does not guarantee anything today. Notwithstanding what President McPhee and the dean and the provost say. Or the idiot former governor who made his whole, thing, let's get as many people as we can to have a college degree. Because you know what happens when everybody has a college degree? What happens to that college degree?
It means nothing.
Yeah, it means nothing. Okay? It means nothing. A bachelor's degree today is like a high school degree was 20 years ago. A high school graduation diploma. If you want a degree that's really going to mean something today, it's got to be a master's degree. Unless you're in a field, one of those really current, hip, fields where the bachelor's degree does indicate, a level of proficiency and stuff, like concrete industry management. rim, accounting. Okay? So, ignorance and poverty. These are part of the human condition. Right and wrong. Do we even have a notion of right and wrong anymore? Define it. We don't, in the United States, have an idea of absolute right and wrong. Here's an example. If you know anything at all about recent trial in Texas, white, relatively young, female cop, a couple of years ago, walked into, she said, what she thought was her apartment, and there's a man there. Boom, puts 2 bullets in his chest. Oops. She was on the 4th floor, not the 3rd floor. She walked into his apartment, not her apartment. Okay? Killed him instantly. Well, there was a trial. She was found guilty of murder, not manslaughter, murder. Murder implies it's premeditated, okay? She was found guilty, and, members of the family cried and stuff on the witness stand, and then the guy's 18-year-old brother got up, talked on the witness stand. Hopefully I won't break down while talking about this. And at the end of it, he said, I don't want you to go to jail. Botha, his brother, who was dead, would not want you to go to jail. Here's what I want you. I want you to find God. You need Christ in your life. And the guy's just tears running down his face. It's one of those beautiful things. And then he looks at the judge and he says, can I give her a hug? And the judge is kind of like, violates all kinds of, judicial norms. And she said, yes. And he gets off the stand and he goes down, and Amber Grier comes forth, and they hug for about 5 minutes. And then, and this is what I'm getting at, this idea of right and wrong. So he stops. The judge gets out of her seat, comes down, after everything's done, that is, the judicial proceeding was over at that point. They still had sentencing, but that wasn't going to be that judge. Or maybe she had already done it. Anyway, judicial proceeding was done. The judge gets down and goes up and hugs the person just found guilty and given 10 years for murder, and gives her her own copy of the Bible. And that judge is now being raked over the coals for acting improperly, for acting wrongly. In what kind of society is that behavior wrong? I mean, it blows my mind. Okay? What else? Look at that one. Need to learn to adapt to life in society. What the hell does that even mean? Because I don't think they say anything else. Where is it? Yeah, just the need to adapt to life in society. Chapter 22, verse 1 through 4. A good name is to be chosen. Is that right? Yep. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. Favor is better than silver or gold. The rich and the poor meet together. The Lord is the maker of them all. A prudent man sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life. I don't get that at all. But I do think it's true in a larger sense. Because what does that mean to adapt to life in society? If you live on a desert island by yourself, you get to do what? Whatever you want, right? As soon as somebody else lands on that deserted island, however, what happens? Two things at least. Politics and ethics. Why? The first is about power distribution. Sharing power, the power between individuals. The second, it's about the relationship between individuals, how you interact with others. At the very least, you have to say, one of the things Proverbs is about how people should interact. Does the writer of Proverbs ever say, the rich man who screws over the poor man will find favor in God's eyes? No. What does he say? The poor and humble who accepts the recognition that things are so in the world as it appears under the sun will find favor. That is, the poor and humble who takes it will find favor in God's eyes and such. Okay? Lastly, they talk about a need to accommodate the mysterious deity. Okay? Maybe it's just me, because of my upbringing. I don't think the deity that's described in Proverbs is all that mysterious. I mean, am I wrong there? Did somebody do this or this? I mean, I'm seeing a lot of no's. Okay? It's pretty clear what the mysterious deity wants, isn't it? In terms of these two things. What are they? What should the rich's attitude be towards the poor? Should it be, sucks to be you. Glad I'm Bill Gates. No, it shouldn't. I mean, I'll stick her head. No, it shouldn't be like that. Why? We've got a phrase, we don't hear it much in modern English. We heard it a lot 100 years ago and several hundred years ago. There but for the grace of God go I. What's that mean? I could be poor too. I know a guy who a few years ago, he didn't have a great life, but it was an okay life. Had a job, had a place to live, pretty much liked his job, was, in addition to his job, was kind of a jack of all trades. This guy could do everything. He was taught welding early in life, so, he could always fall back on that and such. But one thing led to another after the recession of 2008, and the place he had worked for 20 years cut him loose. And literally within months, he went from having a place to live and having a full-time job and a decent income to being homeless. And then while homeless, 2 heart attacks. And not able to collect any kind of Social Security or medical disability. Why? Because the wheels of government move slowly. And he was homeless for 3 years. He's still, quote unquote, considered homeless, but he lives in a shelter. He had to leave Tennessee to do it. Had to go to another place. Okay? Sucks to be him. No. What's that mean? That could be anybody. Okay. It can't be Bill Gates. It can't be Jeff Bezos. Why? Because Jeff Bezos would buy the state, essentially. Founder of Amazon. So filthy rich. Okay? So this, according to Oxford Companion, this is the purpose. Well, partly according to Tarazi, this is really, verses, chapter 1, the first half of verse 2, and chapter 1, verse 7, are kind of the bookends for what the whole book means. So, 1:7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Notice, knowledge is juxtaposed with ignorance. Okay? Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Then look at 1:2a. That men may know wisdom and instruction. What Tarazi suggests is that those two things, those are what the book is all about. And that those statements are statements of the editor or redactor of the entire book. That the editor or redactor, the guy who compiles all these in the 3rd or 4th century, takes it all together. And just like you do to make whiskey or something, he distills it. He puts it in the pot, he turns on the heat, and he burns away all of the unnecessary stuff. And these two ideas are the pure distilled wisdom that comes out. This is the whole purpose of the book. To know wisdom and instruction. Wisdom is different than instruction. The instruction, he suggests, Tarazi suggests, is the Jewish belief system. Why? Because when they got carried off into Babylon, they were removed from the temple. The priests stopped doing their duties. Everything was essentially forgotten. Okay? And in fact, he even argues, and I think he's right, that this goes back to, the Deuteronomic historian kind of discussion that we had before. The person who puts together Pentateuch, Joshua, Judges, etc., has this overarching idea, which is, again, you do what? What happens? You don't walk in the ways of the Lord. You don't follow God. Bad things happen. Then you turn, you repent, God blesses you, you follow, wash and rinse and repeat. So, go on a little bit, because I know we spent over an hour talking about not Proverbs per se. I want to point out a couple of parallels. Chapter 1, verse 26. And let me back up. Verse 24. Because I have called and you refuse to listen, I've stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, and you've ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof. So notice there's several things going on there. Because I, who's the I? I is wisdom. Wisdom is speaking here. Okay? I've called you, you wouldn't listen. I stretched out my hand. That is, I tried to reach you, and you haven't reached up to grab. You've ignored my counsel. You would have none of my reproof. What's reproof? You're wrong. That's reproof. How does quote unquote wisdom / God reprove? Look at Job. Look at Psalms. Okay? A little bit of pain. I will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when panic strikes you. You don't have to turn back to it. But Psalms 2, verse 4. He who sits in the heavens laughs, the Lord has them in derision. Why? Because they will say, verse 3, let us burst their bonds asunder and cast the cords from us. That is, we're not going to listen to God. And so God's going to go, want a bed. And he will mock. Well, that's what the proverbist, the person who writes Proverbs says. Okay? Go down to 29. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. And then you get fear replaced in the next verse by counsel and reproof. So you start to see, you've got this used repeatedly, or these used repeatedly. You've got fear, counsel, instruction, and reproof. Also, repeatedly throughout Proverbs, and not just Proverbs. Go back to Psalms. Go back to Job. Go back to Deuteronomy. Go back to Exodus. If you will walk in my ways, what are God's ways? All of these things. Then, ... All right? Let's skip a little bit more. So, just chapter 2. Treasure up my commandments. What are the commandments? Those aren't commandments here in the book of Proverbs. Those are what? The commandments. The 10 commandments, probably, as well as all of the other Old Testament laws. So, treasure these things. Make your ear attentive to wisdom. Incline your heart to understanding. And if you cry out for insight, raise your voice for understanding. If you seek it, etc., then, chapter 2, verse 5, you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Notice, if you try, then you will find. Okay? Kind of like what Paul says in, where? 1 or 2 Timothy. Those in whom God has begun a good work, he will perfect it to the end. What's the good work? Seeking after God. Okay? Look at, what is that? Chapter 3. Verse 13. Verse 11. I keep wanting to go back. Verse 6. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Ways and paths there, they're synonyms. That is, in all your roads, in all streets you take. No matter where you are, whatever path you're on, do what? Acknowledge God. And he'll do what? Whatever road that is you're on, he'll straighten it out. It's a lot easier to drive on a straight road, right? When I first moved to Tennessee, I lived on Lookout Mountain down in outside Chattanooga. I've driven on mountains most of my life, but I could tell when people came to Chattanooga from Florida. They don't have a clue how to drive on anything that has a hump of 20 feet or more, or that's windy, because they drive down Lookout Mountain and ride the brakes the whole 5 miles. So by the time you get to the bottom, there's nothing but burning asbestos. Fills the cars. I drive down and not use the brakes at all, just downshift when I needed to. Okay? It's making my way straight. That's when I was young and stupid. He'll make your path straight. Go down to 11. Do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof. 13. Happy is the man who finds wisdom and the man who gets understanding. Look at 15. She. Who's the she? Wisdom. Wisdom is personified as female here. Okay? She is more precious than jewels, which is why you get so much language in the Proverbs about women. It's not necessarily the case that the writers of Proverbs are saying, beware women. If wisdom is personified as a she, then what else can be personified as a she? Not human women that we necessarily know. Foolishness. That's why he says, stay away from she who has the loose lips and such. He's not literally very surface level. Yes, he is saying, stay away from prostitutes. Why? They're going to give you diseases. Stay away from people who are like prostitutes. Why? They're going to give you diseases. They're going to make you at ease. Okay? Her ways, wisdom's ways, are ways of pleasantness. Her paths are peace. 23. Then you will walk on your way securely. 24. If you sit down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Well, where have we heard about peaceful sleep? Back in Psalms. And what did your editor say? Your little footnotes down at the bottom. Oh, he must be sleeping in the temple and feel peace. That's Psalm 3:5, by the way. I lie down and sleep. I wake again, for the Lord sustains me. And we're told, it is perhaps after having spent the night in the temple. And yet, when we hear about lying down, your sleep will be sweet. Here, there's nothing about sleeping in the temple. So why is it in Psalms and not in Proverbs? Maybe it's the same thing. Maybe the speaker in Psalms has some wisdom. And so when he sleeps how? At peace. Well, what can at peace mean? What does Job say at the very beginning when his family and everything is taken away? The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away, blessed be the name. Everything that happens for a reason. Job doesn't know what that reason is. Is he given the reason at the end of the book of Job? No. What is he given? God's wisdom is not man's wisdom. That is, you wouldn't understand it if I told you. Okay? Which is why, I think, I could be wrong, which is why St. Paul in 1 Corinthians, I think, says, now we see but through a glass darkly. What's a glass darkly? That means dirty lenses. Dirty windows. That's a dirty window. It could be a lot dirtier. But then, when in heaven, after the resurrection, we shall see face to face. What's that mean? No glasses. Nothing between. We'll see how. Perfectly. Possibly meaning, oh, so that's why that happened to me. Because at the end, the puzzle makes sense. Okay, I did not even talk all about this. For Tuesday, we don't class. For Thursday, read Ecclesiastes and bring this back. We'll talk about this briefly. I won't say anything else about Proverbs because they're just individual Proverbs. Read Ecclesiastes. I'll have your papers.